Proven Media Solutions. Thanks for joining us for another week of Cracking the Comms Code. And with me are three op-ed editors across three different verticals. And we're going to be going back to that old-fashioned tool of op-eds that a lot of communications professionals think is a dinosaur, with being replaced by LinkedIn and newsletters and podcasts and other tools. But as we're going to hear today, this is still a very powerful tool, especially if you are a newer brand. You're someone who's new in politics, you're new in an industry, you've moved to your region, you want to make an impact. Op-eds are a way to get that third-party validation, but it requires a very different style, as Ross and David were laying out in our prep call, than a newsletter, than a blog post, than reaching out on social media. So Carl, David, Ross, if you could introduce yourselves, we'll kick this thing off.
All right, go ahead, David.
Okay. My name is David Mills. I'm the deputy editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's editorial page and a columnist. And I'm the one who gets pitches and submissions for the op-ed page.
And David, would you mind going on mute just when you're not, just because of the dogs? I apologize. Apologies. Go ahead, Carl.
I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief of RealClearPolitics, but and I've been here more than a decade, but I grew up born and raised in the newspaper business. And so op-eds are still near and dear to my heart. And we'll talk more about how I handle them in a minute, but that's who I am.
Ross?
Ross Wilkers, senior reporter at Washington Technology. We're a trade publication focused on companies that provide tech and software products to the U.S. government. And the majority of our op-eds we source from industry leaders that give other industry leaders action items on how to operate their business and work with the government. So, looking forward to the discussion and questions from everybody watching.
And so to anyone watching, please do bring your questions to the comments. I'll be looking down, not because I'm taking a nap by raising 5 kids, but by actually looking at the comments to try to bring them into the conversation. So let me just give a little bit of background. My company, a lot of what we do is op-ed writing. And over the last few years, I've wondered, were we kind of, the horseshoe maker in the era of cars? Were we just an outdated business model, especially as AI came into impact and helping speed up the writing process? And what I realized is, yes, there are tons of other tools, LinkedIn, newsletter, et cetera, that don't require that third-party validation. They don't require Carl to edit it and fact check it, or Ross to say, no, it's not that great of a fit, or David to say, sorry, we're not interested in that voice at this time. But the upside of that means that, the downside of being your own voice is, unless you have a lot of money and a lot of influence already, or a crazy new idea that's going to change the world, it's really hard to get that validation very quickly. And we have found that we get people with minimal name recognition, if any, into outlets that elevate their brand, elevate what they want to say, elevate the message they want to share. And so what I wanted to talk through here was, Carl, David, Ross, from your different perspectives, do op-eds even matter anymore, first of all? And then second, if they do, which again, I endorse them heartily, is what are the things that you're seeing that PR professionals can get better at in order to more successfully place them with you and to reach your audiences? And then David, I'd probably start with you if you don't mind, because you and I have talked at length about this, that state outlets, regional outlets, and local media, they don't really care about national voices. You may see a national issue, but it's always tied to that local and regional community really impactfully.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, we do. I mean, we do have national voices who write for us. This is, the paper's been around a long time. We built a reputation, and we like them because they have something to say. So we're still a city newspaper, primarily, and a regional newspaper. So our focus is on things that happen in Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, and West Virginia. So we want, how do I put this? If you want to pitch something to me, I mean, if you're thinking about sending something to me, it will affect readers in a fairly wide range, geographic area. If they're interested in your product, interested in your voice, interested in your ideas, they will get them. The one thing I tell people about op-eds, though, is they're not magical. A lot of people feel that they write an op-ed in a city newspaper, and they should suddenly get all sorts of comments, and they should get people writing them and saying you're absolutely brilliant. It doesn't really happen. But you're beginning just to get your name out, and a newspaper still gives you, a little to my surprise, a kind of a seal of approval, an imprimatur, or something like that, as a real person, as a real voice. You've been vetted, you've been approved by a serious thing that's actually on paper. We're not going to publish you because you're cheap or easy. Even if we publish you just on the web, it's because you have something to say and it's a voice we want to feature. So, and people still read them that way. This means something. John publishes a Substack. Okay, John publishes in the Post-Gazette. Oh, he's a real person.
We see the same thing nationally. I mean, Real Clear obviously is a highly sought after outlet, not just for your original content, but also for backlinks. Do you see that same sort of impact and improvement?
Well, Dustin, you've placed numerous op-eds with me, and there's reasons to do it. Still, you're right. People can put on their LinkedIn. I have writers, columnists who write for me, and they also write for they have a Substack. Sometimes they'll, will you link to this because we also aggregate. But writers want to write, and so you have two sort of groups there. You have just people who used to be in the news business, or writers have thoughts about what's going on. I got a pitch today from a guy who wants to write about Catholic social teaching about what's a just war. Well, this is very contemporary. If he'd have hit me with that 3 weeks ago, I would have maybe thought it was a little esoteric and said maybe Real Clear Religion will handle that. Well, suddenly the president and the Pope are in basically an argument over what's just war. Now, the president hasn't been, I don't know how much Jesuit teachings he's read, but he has instincts and he knows and so we have this conversation going. So this is very much a thing, and people want to be heard. They want to see their name in print. They want to be part of the conversation. That's still true. Then you have public relations people like yourself who have clients, and they send me pieces. We can get into that in a minute, what I'm looking for there. But then the third group is trade associations, people in politics. They don't go through you. They just approach me directly. And all three of those sources, they have sort of maybe different motivations. But the process on our end is similar. We judge them by is it an argument we haven't heard before? Is it an interesting argument? I have to tell you, is it well written? I mean, that's subjective, but I'll tell you this, and I don't be curious what David thinks of this, but if there's an ad hominem argument in the first paragraph, or if somebody calls, Donald Trump is not a king, he's an emperor, and he's also insane, and he's a narcissist, and he's a rapist. Well, I'm not even going to, okay, that's not advancing your argument. That's just name calling. I don't like any ad hominem argument at all. But the flip side of that is if someone writes an op-ed for us, I will typically edit it myself, and I will try and make their arguments stronger. Now, sometimes, in my opinion, in my way of thinking, you can make their arguments stronger by taking out the ad hominem stuff, the extra stuff, the junk, the throat clearing. I hate Donald Trump as well as the next man, but I don't need that. I make your argument. And so, anyway, I could talk on ad infinitum about this, but my point is that we're not looking for Hemingway, but we're looking for people who make a cogent argument, an argument that has some integrity, and best case scenario, an argument we maybe haven't heard before, or an argument we have heard before expressed in a way we haven't heard before. And so, and I don't have to agree with them. I rarely agree with them, but we'll publish them because that's our model. It's the old newspaper model. You have voices left, right, and center, and we do that. So, and people sometimes surprise, I know you'll disagree with this. Yeah, okay, but we'll run it because you presented your arguments in good faith and with some integrity.
Yeah, I will probably immediately turn down any article that's just a little hysterical, ad hominem, angry. There might be really good stuff in it, but I don't have time to pull the stuff out of it. So I will usually kill. And the spirit behind it is, you just don't want to deal with that. I do tell writers, no ad hominem, and kill the adverbs and adjectives. You go through that and your piece will improve 75%.
I hated that when David was my editor a decade ago, because I would look at half the pieces he edited. I was like, these have become masterpieces. Oh my gosh. And the other half, I was going, he killed my voice. And the editor said, no, it's better now. And I was,
Yes.
but I'm now 10 years older and a little less attached to my writing as the so I'm more sympathetic to David's perspective at the time when I was a reporter and he was my editor. Ross, we've talked a little bit, politics has been a little mentioned by David and a lot by Carl, but when from your perspective at a trade outlet, I don't read Washington Technology every day, but I don't think you really talk about politics. I think you talk about policy and impact of policy. So can you dive into what a trade outlet looks at differentiated from the other two gentlemen have discussed?
The mission and vision statement by and large of a trade outlet is to inform industry professionals about what is going on in their industry and to help them do their job better. How does that relate to our topic of op-eds? We want to hear from other industry professionals, and also something that's unique in the industry that I cover is that there is an army of consultants. We'll just call it that, right? There are consultants that help other companies conduct their business in the market. And so what we look for is a lot of what David and Carl has said before, right? It is to present a problem, formulate the argument, right? And ways to attack the problem. And what also makes for a stronger op-ed is to respond to potential counter arguments, anticipate those, and basically treat it like the frequently asked questions section on a lot of websites, where it's like, we know this will come up if somebody presents it, but here are our counter arguments for it. And we do find that op-eds that are missing those, if it's missing the counter arguments, I can say that our editors and myself, we are willing to work with the writers on that element of it to help make the piece stronger, but we also have limited time and bandwidth constraints as well. So we do have our limits on what we're able to improve upon for what's submitted.
Dustin, can I add one thing to what Ross said? Because it's very important. This idea of anticipating arguments, and so in politics you get that a lot, but they'll preface it by basically mischaracterizing the other side, or saying what the other side's view in such a pejorative, in superficial way that it undermines them. I covered President Clinton, and he once said, he was talking about an education bill, and he said, my good friends on the Republican side, they just don't think poor kids can learn to read, but I think they can. He was acting like he was giving their side. Well, no Republican was saying poor kids couldn't learn to read. And so, so I have a rule, and it's actually in stone at our office, and it's this: when characterizing the arguments of someone with whom you disagree, make sure they recognize it as their argument.
Oh, I like that.
If you don't do that, you're just knocking down straw men, and I'm not interested in that. So that's the sort of the cannon codicil to Ross's point about, if you're gonna do that, and it's a good idea to do it, because otherwise you're starting the story in the middle. You're going to argue against conventional wisdom. You're going to say, I think it's good that gasoline prices are high. You say that.
Right.
You're going to make an environmental argument, let's say. Well, then don't start by saying, the Trump family wants oil prices to be high because they're dabbling in the market and they're shorting futures. Maybe they are, but you don't know that. What you know is that the president is actually rationalizing high gas prices because he's not yet ready to quit the war in Iran. So just, don't, what did Shakespeare say? Don't paint the lily or gild the gold. Yeah, just say what the other side is. If you have a better argument, you got to you got to trust your argument. You got to trust it enough that you're saying the other side, the other argument, with give them their due. Then
Well, so-
then make your case.
So I want to, I want
Kristen,
to, go ahead,
can I
David.
have
I'm
one
sorry.
thing to that?
I broke my 2-second silence rule. I'm sorry. Go.
You're forgiven.
Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. Oh, now I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No worries. So
Sorry, I went on too long, David. I
Just-
apologize.
Wave your hand. One of the things that you said, Carl, you've all talked really well here about framing your argument, pulling some things out, working with the editor. That's a lot of time and effort. And a lot of people in the PR industry, again, I run an agency, will say, well, we can just get it up somewhere that's going to be easier, that doesn't have as high editing standards. USA Today as a whole fact-checking part of their operation. I've worked with each of you for either stuff under my name or under client names. So I know how you all work. And Ross, you have said no to probably 65% of the pieces I've sent you over the years because they're not quite on point. Or David, you used to take more pieces and you said, we've actually had a better stable of writers more recently. So I don't, you need to have tighter content, Dustin. And I take that feedback, bring it back to the client, we go from there. But the reason I bring that up is it's a whole lot easier to use the straw man argument, Carl, and try to go viral and try to have an impact that way. Why should people put the effort in for an op-ed when there are so many other options that require less effort? Third-party validation, David, of course, is a big part of that counter argument, which I heartily endorse. But I'd be very interested in the value you all see on the back end when you have so much competition for the low barrier of entry to opinions in the internet era.
Well, I remember what I was going to say in response to Carl. A lot of the pitches I get from people, I realize they just want to place the article, and it's not very good. But if you really want to influence people, you want them not just to click on your article. Because we of course measure the amount of time readers are on articles, and I published some things not recently, but before I learned, they were literally under 10 seconds a reader, and then they read the first paragraph and quit. But if you're really serious about what you're doing and placing it and having influence, you need to be read all the way through. And people read quality. They read fair arguments. They read real arguments. They don't read abuse. They won't read a whole article that's just abusing Trump, even if they hate Trump or love him, whatever. They won't read the whole article. So if you really want to make an influence, it has to be good. Because as I tell you from my observation of how long people stay on the article, they only stay on articles that tell them something, and they won't read them through.
Ross, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So the root of the question is why place an op-ed with another
So much
with a
right.
Why would you? Yeah, it's why would anybody do that, right? The Substack exists. We were talking about that in our prep call, right? LinkedIn exists, and the group that I mentioned earlier, the industry of consultants to the industry, they self-publish on LinkedIn all the time, and those comment threads go off the charts all the time. Sometimes they go into places that are interesting. I'll just be diplomatic for that. So it's why would you pitch to a place that's edited? The advantage that a news outlet has, in my context, for a trade publication, and David Post-Gazette, Carl RealClearPolitics, the advantage that we have is that when you self-publish, you are talking to your core channel, your core constituents. We can take you outside of that with a much wider and diverse nature of our readership. And what it also does is for somebody that is trying to get out there kind of as a leader, a guest op-ed is also a good way to get more comfortable with the attention that comes with having your name published on something. I've lost count of how many times I've interviewed industry executives and other people that you write an article about them and it goes viral, right? And they're not accustomed to that sort of attention, and it makes them uncomfortable. Well, with an op-ed, it's just it's your name, it's 100% your voice. Hopefully, it's edited by somebody. And in our context, it creates a symbiotic relationship with other readers in that industry. Say, hey, this person knows what they're talking about. I want to know more.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Dustin. I mean, but if you're just preaching to the choir, if you're trying to, there's different reason people write that they want to raise money. They just want to get on the record as venting. Then maybe you don't need an op-ed or an RCP. But if you're actually trying to change minds, you're trying to reach the people who don't already agree with you, if you're trying to round up votes, if you're trying to just educate the public, if you're trying to, what's that old phrase from Superman? If you just believe in truth, justice, and the American way, well, then maybe you want a mass audience. And so op-eds, they're not everything doesn't have to be an op-ed, but that's why people come to us, and I think they're right to do it.
Pinkston is a PR firm out of Falls Church, and they did basically a white paper, a research-oriented white paper 3 or 4 years back on are op-eds still relevant? And I did a piece right around that time, and I interviewed one of their partners, and he pointed out that it costs X amount of money to do an ad of a certain size with the Washington Post. If you get the op-ed, again, it's the Washington Post. They only publish a handful a day of the 1,000 or whatever they get every day. But that is free. And then that's going to get syndicated across the board. And Ross, you're part of a larger network. Carl, your RealClear Wire, of course, allows republishing, and you can even get backlinks across other parts of the RealClear umbrella. David, you guys are privately owned, but you still are the biggest player in your region. So I actually think republishing is also a huge value of the op-ed, whether it's full or partial, and because those outlets tend to get picked up by other places that are doing roundups. They're doing newsletter pickups, or like RCP, we often pitch you op-eds. We also often pitch pieces published elsewhere and say, can you backlink it?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of value in op-eds for the republishing component as well, if those outlets allow that or are part of a larger conglomerate, like a USA Today under Gannett.
Yeah, or we're part of we give things to the Tribune News Service.
Sure.
And they pick up a lot of our op-eds, and there are a number of bigger publishers who pick up, basically, it must have an algorithm, they pick up everything from us and put it like on their sites. So an op-ed in us isn't just it doesn't read in the Post-Gazette, it's read by, one of the very big sites publishes everything, from which my point of view, wanting to get Post-Gazette readers is really annoying. But it means that thousands more people will see an op-ed that will on top of the ones that see it in the newspaper, in the Post-Gazette. So I think every paper is picked up. Like I reprint a lot of RealClear Wire stuff.
Yep.
Because it helps, it's good, it gives me a different point of view. So op-eds also go much farther than you'd expect, and a lot more sites.
I've also found that they can help us elevate people who have never been published before. So David, you recently published a piece that we sent you by a friend of mine. He had something to say. This, beyond his personal Facebook page, has no public presence. He hasn't been in the public eye since he was a journalist 12 years ago or something, 10 years ago. And you published him because he had something to say.
Oh yeah, I really liked it. It was good.
And so I also think that op-eds are a way that you can elevate a brand very quickly. Because again, unless you have a big name or a lot of money, that unless you have the ad money for it, is probably not going to go that wide. But you can get an op-ed in RealClearPolitics or Fox News Digital or Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can elevate your brand very quickly, comparatively.
Yeah, and once you have a real publication, editors take that as a reason to look at you more closely. And not just immediately delete or reject the article. Oh, he's been published somewhere. Well, he must have something to say, or he must be good, or he must be worth looking at. Not always true, mind you, but that's what people think. Editors think.
What are the biggest mistakes you see when agencies are pitching? I know for myself, I still do a lot of the pitching at my company. I'm always trying to balance follow-ups. I'm always trying to say, there's a reason for the follow-up, like, hey, it's still exclusively yours, for the initial pitch for 48 hours or 24 hours. Then there's a follow-up, hey, it's still exclusively yours for the next 4 hours. Trying to find a reason not to harass, but to follow up. And sometimes an editor will say, thank you very much. David, the other day, you said you missed my initial email. You saw the follow-up. But I also have been concerned, and Carl, you've been very kind, not taking my hat off. I'm sure there are times you've looked and said, well, this gosh darn guy, Dustin, just leave me alone. I'm getting 19,000 other pitches related to Thanksgiving this year.
Well,
So-
Dustin, in your case, yeah, you're persistent, but you stay on the right side of the line. I mean, and I'll tell you, there's a glass house issue. If I'm going to say, oh, just send it to me once, don't bother me again, because I missed the prep call for this Zoom today. And you had sent me not one email, but two, and then a reminder yesterday, and it was on my calendar. Now, does that mean I'm disorganized? No, I'm actually not disorganized. It means
Sure.
that this stuff is coming at me like a video game. And
Right.
so I'm sure David gets more pitches than he can even read. The point is that you need to assume, unless I tell you that I haven't seen it. I get 400 or 500 emails a day. I can't read them all. So I would err on the side of making contact until you hear otherwise. And if somebody, look, if you think you've become a pain in the ass to an outlet, an editor, just ask them. Am I bothering too much? It's actually a human thing to ask, and it helps with the connection. Now this is just me. What I don't like, and this is because modern communications, I don't really like phone calls. That I don't really have time for that. I'm usually, somebody will call, I'm doing a radio show, or I forgot to silence my phone. We have a daily show. Text is okay. Email's best for me. I think everybody's different. Calls don't. I find calls a little bit from a flag, a little bit beyond what I'm looking for.
Yeah, agree.
That's helpful. That's really helpful. Ross, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah. I mean, at least in my case, right, I'm as a working journalist, my phone here, right, it's for texts and phone calls for source conversations and for interviews and for other things. So I know for me, like, I try to draw like a hard boundary on which communication method that I use. And so for email, I mean, granted, some emails hit my inbox and I have to jump on those immediately, but I tend to err on the side of going through my inbox slowly, because going through 300 emails can't do it in 20 minutes, no matter how hard I've tried.
One of the things that David, you and I have talked about is writing or pieces that are submitted by agencies that are clearly designed for their corporate client and not necessarily designed for the reader. Would you dial into that a little bit on how that is something that you as an editor will flag and then reject? Because I think a lot of, PR agency, we're getting paid to help somebody or an organization get their name out there. And so we have to do that in a way that meets your needs, because you represent the audience that we're trying to reach.
Yes. Well, it applies to Carl's note, because one of the signs of that is when someone writes with a target or an enemy, or a really strong declaration against someone else. That's a clear sign. It's either from an activist agency, activist group, or a corporation or something. So I tend to just turn those down, because again, I don't have the time to go in and find out that the writer is in fact working for such and such, or a group associated with the subject and so on. So I will tend to just on this err on the side of caution, turn them down. And one of the signs, so I tell people, even if I think they have politicians, they always send you articles pitching the latest bill, which is almost pointless. No one's going to change no representative is going to change his vote because of an article in the Post-Gazette. But what I say what I tell them to do, if they flip that and talk about the subject, and then at the end they can say something, or we'll put in the author bio something about the particular bill, that I can use, but that's educational, it's helpful, it may in fact change someone's mind. And so it's generally the articles that have an obvious agenda that raise red flags for me. And again, there's only one of me doing this, and so I will just almost always reject them because I don't have time to work on them.
Well, yeah, and to that point, Dustin, sometimes you'll get like 3 or 4 op-eds on an issue you never heard of, and they're very similar. They're from some retired congressman you never heard of.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's about, you know, Congress is going to be dealing with this issue of brake pads on cabooses on trains that are of less than 6 cars. And you go, what the hell? And somebody's got legislation they've stuck in there is going to make somebody $1 million, and God bless them if they can work the system. But that's not something that's of interest to my readers. And every once in a while, a flack or a company or even an individual, it's like, I want to say, have you ever read Real Clear Politics? We don't write about brake pads on cabooses, and so that's off-putting. And if you get too many of those, you begin to notice who's sending me this crap. And we don't blacklist people, but you don't want to be on that. You don't want to be that guy.
It's such a tough thing to do. We were working on an issue, a really niche issue that blew up in a particular state. And we flat out told our client, yeah, we got like 6 or 7 pieces published on the topic, but we had 4 different authors, all with different backstories, because otherwise it was going to look very coordinated. And it had to be based around the individual voices in their actual real story, because the data is all the same.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Dustin. Also, if a person, we're taught in J school, if you're my generation or David's, not to make yourself the story. But
right.
we know at this, most of the newspapers are suffering, and a lot of the newspapers I worked on are dead. We weren't doing it perfectly right. Readers actually like, if you have if you know an issue personally, if you have some history with it, that's not off-putting to me. Somebody says, yeah, my party's for this, but I'm actually really for this because, my son has dyslexia, and so we had to go to different schools, and that kind of, if it's true, I mean, those kind of personal testimonials. There's a great writer named Joel Garrow who worked for the Washington Post for many years and wrote books, and he became a friend. And Joel and I used to teach writing classes together, and he would say, he had some line, he'd say, every story begins this way: I was there, and this is no shit. And what he means by that is, if you have some personal knowledge of a subject, that's informed your view, go ahead and put that in the op-ed. That's actually something that appeals to me as an editor and a reader.
Yes.
Yeah. Ross, I want to make sure we don't forget about the trade outlet, the apolitical trade outlet. So Matt Noggle, who's in the public affairs political space, he asked, what's better for most PR value purposes? A high-profile publication that puts your piece behind a paywall, or an easy-to-find online outlet with no legacy reputation, but no paywall? And there's this big discussion on the PR side of the table of, great, you got it into the Wall Street Journal, but it's behind a paywall. The LLMs can't, have more difficulty finding it unless it gets republished somewhere or etc. So if I remember correctly, David, you all have a paywall after a certain number of outlets, a certain number of reads. Carl, there is none at RealClear. There's just a sign up for our email pop up sometimes. And Ross, I don't think you're all behind a paywall, correct?
Our journalism is behind the paywall, but most of our op-eds are not.
And so from the PR side, there's that tension of reaching the audience and the core audience of the readership, plus the LLMs. From the editor side of things, is that part of your consideration, your calculation on as you're thinking through the value of trying to make sure that people understand, with all these other tools, there still is the value of the edited op-ed, the third-party op-ed.
It goes back to what we were talking about, I think, in the second part of our conversation, which is, who are you trying to reach? Right? Mm-hmm. Are you trying to reach the general populace? Are you trying to reach K Street? Are you trying to reach Hill staffers, or industry, or in my case, industry executives that are working professionals and looking to learn more about how they do their job? So the first question to ask, let me pull up my notes here, is, when possible, if you want to pitch an outlet, is to skim the website or publication, with the respect that a lot of publications are subscription, right? You at least should skim it first to see if what you are pitching has anything to do with their focus, mission, or audience. And, if you're unsure about what that is, it's probably it's better not to just email the article to the three of us or any of us on the call, I think it's perfectly okay and acceptable in a position like yours, Dustin, to say like, hey, we have a client that has knowledge in subjects A, B, and C. What do you look for in the op-eds? I give you the best answer that I can, and then you take that information and then you make that decision, based on your purposes.
I would challenge that because I think I appreciate that, and you've done that with me when I've sent you pitches. But Carl, you get 400 emails a day. David, you got from 2 people in your department to 1. Do you have the time to respond to most of those, especially if it's someone you don't already are familiar with, and you can trust that they're going to use good judgment?
Yeah, I don't answer every email, but I try, but I don't. But to your original question, Dustin, I mean, if somebody, you mentioned the Wall Street Journal, that's
Right.
probably the most, in business circles, the most prestigious newspaper in North America.
Right.
It's also, except for depending on how you count circulation, USA Today figures, and it's probably the widest circulating newspaper in America, in the United States. So if someone has a chance to get an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, they should just do it. That'd be my sort of rule of thumb. But that's almost a separate category. Now, and we occasionally link to Wall Street Journal pieces, but they have a paywall. It's pretty strict. We have a widget with them, some agreement with them. I'm not on the business side, so I don't know the exact details, but there's a certain number of pieces, a couple a month. If you click on it from Real Clear Politics, you can go ahead and read it. So but the Wall Street Journal is the exception that proves the rule. Really, I think if you're submitting a piece, I think you should to avoid paywalls if you can.
David? You're on mute. No, you're on mute. David? We still can't hear you.
There we go.
Back again. So
the paywall question.
Yeah. So we have a fairly strong paywall. The business model for the newspaper for the last 10 or so years, I think, has been a strong subscription based. So our orientation is more tightly towards the region than other city newspapers, precisely because we want people to want to read things, therefore they subscribe. But as I said, in my case, and it's a little frustrating precisely because that's our business model, our stuff gets picked up and published all sorts of other places. I think it's one of the Microsoft sites, everything goes up, all our op-eds, all our columns.
Is that even legal, David? Or are they stealing the URL?
They're PNS subscribers. So
right. Okay.
So they just apparently have an algorithm that just drops everything we publish onto their site, and sometimes quite prominently too. So, but they're getting thousands and thousands of readers. We're not getting. But yeah. So the fact that we have a strong paywall is a dissuasive for writers in one way, but not in the other, because it's picked up. The stuff is good, and I do edit the things and work with writers on the stuff we publish. So most of it's, all of it's, I think, good, and some is very good, and things that people will pick up and will republish.
Sorry, the 2-year-old came in with a question.
Is it a good question?
She said, "Daddy, my shoes are outside." I was like, "Great, ask your mother." Can't really do anything. So Mike asked, I think you might know Mike H. Ross. He says federal sales is in his job description at LinkedIn. Said, should writers amplify individual opinions, or should they eliminate unspoken tensions and intuitions that are sort of forming within a specific community? My instinctive response is everyone has an opinion. That's what your LinkedIn page for, or your Substack is for. Better to have you either pretend to or actually speak to a concern, and especially when that's counterintuitive, like you said earlier, Carl, when the stock market is crashing and everyone's panicking, the financial advisor who says this is a good time to buy is more likely to get published than everyone saying the same things. So I can look at the amplification of things that you might see that should be said but aren't. Sorry, Ross.
Well, we can establish a basic tenet with that. If you're publishing an op-ed or an argument, you don't want everybody agreeing with you. It's impossible to get everybody on board. And so, look, if it's a minority, I'm not suggesting to Mike H. or anybody that like they should just be controversial for the sake of it. And if we get an article that appears to be controversial or ad hominem for the sake of it, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if it's a minority view that airs out a lot of the unspoken tension points that happens, what that really is doing is it's taking conversations and concepts that are really discussed. They're confined to boardrooms and offices, and you're just putting that in the form of an op-ed in an industry trade publication where everybody reads that and goes, oh yeah, I've experienced that too. I've tried to bring it up in the confines of my employer, but no one wants to talk about it. But now here's an op-ed in Washington Technology that I can now present internally, right? And it creates that virtuous cycle of discussion throughout the industry. So yes, like, if you're trying to, I mean, certainly there's a majority view, and we'll absolutely like publish the majority view, but what I hope we try to do a good job of discouraging op-eds from doing is publishing it for the sake of appealing to the majority view, because again, once you state an opinion, people are going to agree with it, people are going to disagree with it.
And Dustin, the other thing is that the conventional wisdom is usually right. Babe Ruth really was a great baseball player, and so when we say we don't like the conventional wisdom, what we really mean is we like it when someone can show why the conventional wisdom might not be right, because it's usually right. That's why it's the conventional wisdom. But the flip side of that is there are people, who in politics and comedy and movies, they're just personality types. They're just contrarians. They're really they just don't like to, they're misanthropes, really. They just like to be provocative, or they think it's funny, or they think makes them sound like they're independent thinkers. But if they're always going against the conventional wisdom, they themselves are quite predictable and conventional. So you have to, it's this fine line, but you have to make sure that the argument is genuine, that it's real, that the person is saying, I'll give you an example. When the Black Lives Matter thing broke, everybody said there was sort of a universal approach, except some of the far right conservative circles didn't go right. Some conservatives didn't agree with this, but that America had America had a racial problem. I didn't really think we ran a column. We thought America had a policing problem, and that the majority of people, unarmed people shot every year by police, are white, and that by making it a racial issue, we were actually ignoring the underlying problem. We were making it partisan, political, racial. What we weren't dealing with is the real issue. That was a piece that appealed to me greatly. And so those are if you want to really get under the hood and take apart, say this thing is being built wrong. Every editor I know is receptive to those kinds of arguments.
And it doesn't always have to be like that extreme, right? John Tanny published me at Rickler Marcus in 2018, and I made the argument that your coffee buying, the headline was something like, "Bye, Elizabeth. I'm working. Bye. Bye. Later. Bye, please." So I made the argument that millennials spend twice as much on coffee as traditional coffee buyers, and that was hampering their college plans and their retirement plans. And then I laid that out, and that was a little bit fit with the mold of college is too expensive, but I think it stood out because most people my age, I'm 40 now, but I was early 30s at the time, would look and say, well, that coffee buying habit is irrelevant because everything's too expensive. So it fit in with a current consciousness of college debt is too high, but was a little bit counter narrative on a potential solution. And so I think it doesn't have to be as extreme as what you're talking about, while still adding that counter narrative point of view. About 5 to 10 minutes here. Alexandra asked, when clients that want to promote an event or a launch using an op-ed, is there a way to make that launch or the event feel relevant to you? In other words, we want to announce the thing we're doing, but we don't want it to be an advertorial, but we still want to include it. Dave, you haven't said anything in a while. I'd like to pivot to you first. If it's a local business, regional business, or a national business expanding in your region, how do you view the op-ed page as a tool that for them to use that still adds value to your readership?
Well, I have a fairly rigid policy against anything self-promotional.
Okay.
I just won't run them. And it's an editorial page. It's not something, that kind of story I would send over to one of the news reporters, because they might well do something with it. And then from there, from the business point of view, a story on a new enterprise in the business section is more useful than one in the editorial section anyway. But as I said,
Okay.
what I will do sometimes, if it's interesting, it's innovative. We have a lot of high-tech firms and so on in Pittsburgh. They're doing genuinely innovative stuff, and they may have a new project, they may have a new plan, they may have a new shop. I can't do that, but I can say, talk about what you're doing. Why is this interesting? Why is this important? What's the social implications of what you're doing? What are the effects on the Pittsburgh economy? There are all sorts of subjects that they will be authorities on that will work perfectly for an op-ed. But they, again, as I said earlier, they basically have to flip what they want to do. And they can mention in a story like that, we are in fact opening a new shop, we've got this new program, whatever it is, perhaps near the end of the article, or again, I can put it in the author bio. But
Right.
I think that's actually more useful for a lot of these places to be seen and understood, rather than just saying we're doing this great job. If someone says, oh, they're really interesting, they're really thoughtful, this is innovative, this is creative, this is adding to the Pittsburgh's economy or adding to Pittsburgh's innovation culture and so on. Those things are more useful to them, but it takes the work of flipping it out and really finding something you can tell people.
One other thing that's related to that, Dustin. So I'll sometimes get pushes from, I get them daily and say, if you're interested in this subject, so-and-so has written a lot about this and can be available for interviews. And normally I don't even respond to those emails, because if they read RealClearPolitics, they'll know, I've got very small number of reporters and they've got their beats, and that's not what we do. But if the thing that sounds interesting to me, I'll write back and I'll say, if you turn this into your study that you wanted, or your press release, or this person you want me, turn that into an op-ed, I'd be interested. And then if it's really good, and I sometimes take a flyer and say, would you like to come on our radio show? We have this show on Sirius XM from 11 to noon and talk about it. So I've formed relationships from sort of this start, which is they're promoting a book or a white paper or a person, not in a way that I would respond to, but not in a way that fits what we do. But then I say, how about an op-ed? And about half the time that turns into an op-ed that we run.
Ross, you're especially probably prone to that kind of pitching, because organizations always want to talk about at Washington Technology their new tech, the new CIO they hired, etc. So how would, if someone wants to announce the new CIO or the new technology project, how do they do that at Washington Technology?
Right. I really liked the imagery that David laid out of how you almost flip the conversation for what you want to do, because it is very one of the dynamics that exists that I love of working at a publication focused on industry professionals is that our readership is not shy about providing feedback of articles. And so if we publish something that is advertorial or self-promotional in nature, we will get emails about it, and it does not, it will not go over well. Yeah, I don't know if that's true at bigger publications, or more general publications like YouTube, but we get that a lot. So consider that. So for everybody watching, rewind it and watch the flip-flop imagery that David laid out as to what you want to do. Because in our case, if it's an event, you get more value out of that if someone like me or another reporter that I work with is allowed to cover that event from the perspective of a working journalist, right? And to cover the content that's there. Now, as for the op-ed part, to answer it, the question is that, and I asked one of my fellow editing colleagues about this, so I'll just read what she said verbatim. I told my editors that I was coming on this, and I said, hey, give me some ideas to present. So here's one that she said, right? So don't try to covertly advertise for your own product services. It is absolutely fine to reference your company's research or white papers, or even a project you helped a federal agency achieve that went particularly well, but be upfront that it is from you and focus on the practices that enabled the success or challenges you saw that agency face, not the products, right? So so in our context, right, what we're focusing on is not that the product was a magic elixir that fixed everything. It's like, hey, it was more fruitful to say, these are the tough conversations that we had to have up front with our customer before going about this project, for example. Does that help answer the question?
I think it's a great answer, Carl.
Yeah. I can't add a thing to it.
So we've just got a couple more minutes here. I want to dial into, so we call it a storytelling sandwich, where sometimes the thing that our client wants to get mentioned is like a paragraph, maybe a paragraph and a half. And that's okay, because to what everyone else has said here, we got a young woman into Fox News Digital last year. It's a heartbreaking story of her getting into a car accident and her father being part of the EMT team that lifted her into the ambulance. And she couldn't read, she couldn't recognize color. She go through all of this retraining of her whole mind and body. The client had a very specific interest that wasn't even mentioned until the third to last paragraph. We said that going to this event was going to be the capstone of her recovery in a way, because it was 3 years later, and going away from home for 3 nights was going to be a major achievement. What the client cared about was Fox News Digital and the fact that this young woman who was very religious came across as very human. And we published it on Father's Day. And it said something like, I think it was something like the two fathers she was thanking, her human father and her heavenly father. But the storytelling sandwich was the third to last paragraph. And I think that's a lot of what you guys were talking about here is, sure, mention the thing that you're doing, but if that's going to be front and center, it's going to get turned down every time. And I think it's really important to remember that, because again, you can do that in your own newsletter and on LinkedIn and nobody cares. Of course, this is your platform, but you're borrowing someone else's. And I have, again, you said earlier, Carl, you're very kind of saying I'm persistent and not other terms. But at the end of the day, I have to be really careful as someone doing the pitching, because where's that fine line between, hey, this is valuable to your readers, and I'm asking to get into your outlet, borrow your pages, David, for free. There's that very fine line where the PR person cannot be presumptuous and can be persistent, but can't be presumptuous, or you're going to ruin the relationship for you and your firm, in my opinion. We've got about 2 minutes left. Let me see if there's any more questions here. Someone asked here, I guess I'll let you guys respond to this one. This is a tech question from Steve. Have you considered using AI tools to help parse and unearth potential gems you might miss in the flood of email pitches that you get? Have you found AI tools to be useful? And if so, which ones?
Go first, Ross.
Yeah, we're still very much in the experimental phase of using we're even with basic things like copy editing, the news article drafts from our working journalists, right? We're still very much in the exploratory and experimental phase of doing that, which I think aligns with the maturity level of a lot of that technology and its readiness for us to actually use in getting things online to the website.
Well, I guess in this case, it was more looking through your emails, helping you uncover the gems in your emails, because you have 300 a day.
Well, I'm not gonna let a robot do it. And if anybody wonders why, they just go watch one of the Terminator movies or iRobot or 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm not going there yet. And until I retire, I don't think Real Clear Politics will either, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I don't do it either. I mean, the chances of an AI program seeing what I see are still, I think, small. You know, and all the subtleties of a writer that looks good, but there are signals that he'll be very difficult to work with, or he has, all these things. I can't see AI helping very much. So, I mean, the downside is I just miss, as you know, you miss emails and you get overwhelmed. But I also know, and then I also am more personally engaged in the people I do respond to, and that builds friendships, even if you turn down their article.
Well, David's being very sweet, but I want to put this down there where the goats can get it. AI might help me, but I do not want to contribute to the end of the human race. So I'm holding the line.
Cheers.
Fair enough. Guys, this has been so much fun. And as I was saying in our prep call, David was my boss, but I've never actually seen his face beyond photos on Facebook because we only did phone calls or emails. And Carl, I've been pitching you stuff for probably a decade, and we've never
that's
actually
right.
spoken. So
Yeah.
this was such a pleasure, guys. I really appreciate it. It was great to have the 3 different perspectives represented. And we just finished with a quick round robin of what's the most important mistake you see PR people make, and what's the easy solution? And I'll start with saying it's pitching. It's not meeting what we call the 3 T's. The right topic at the right time from an author with the right title. And that title usually doesn't have the letter C next to it. I think if you meet those 3, an editor is likely to at least take you seriously when you're pitching the piece.
Well, I'll go next. I'll be very succinct. Just, you should be familiar with the publication you're pitching. And if you're not, your next pitch won't be treated as seriously as maybe it should be.
Great point.
Yeah. Don't be pushy or presumptuous. I don't, because we get so much stuff and so much good stuff. I don't need anything that comes over the transom, as submission. I don't need it. I've got just as good stuff to publish. And so when a PR, if somebody's just pushy, or they do the advertising language, or they lean on me, or that immediately is just, I don't want to deal with them, because that's a bad sign, but people's going to be difficult to deal with. So no pushiness and no presumptuousness.
Covert or subtle advertisement, self-promotion is what we see too much of in our inbox at not just WT, but I think every industry, trade, publication would speak to that problem as well, where, look, we have an advertising department and a sales department if you want to do that, and we have a sponsor content department if you want to do that, but the editorial pages and op-ed, think about it differently.
Super. Guys, I really appreciate this. I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
See you,
Bye.
Dustin.